We're all set and ready to go. So, welcome everyone. We're going to be talking today about unconscious bias. It's a term that has been talked a lot about recently. That is being explored by a lot of people, and it has a meaning that in context, it has a certain meaning. And what I want to do today is to expand that context. I want to change the way, hopefully, you think about unconscious bias and make it more valuable to you and have you look at the world in a slightly different way. So I encourage you to consider what you're hearing today and see how it can be valuable to you in your life. I am going to share my screen now. We do have a short video. Those of you who, there were one or two who said they couldn't see videos. There is a short video about 2/3 of the way through the presentation. All right, whoa, too fast. There we go. So if you have your Zoom chat, your chat room open, you might want to just move that off to the side and you'll be able to see the slides. So we're going to be talking about how your brain works and what that means in terms of unconscious bias and what really is an unconscious bias. Oh, my fast forward on my screen share is not working. Not my fast forward, but my forward. What's the story here? There we go. Okay, I fixed it. Got it. So unconscious bias. Now, the term right now is often used to refer to how we are seeing other people, how we are perceiving the world. And it actually, in many cases, has sort of a negative connotation to it. And I want you to think about it a little bit differently if you're willing, at least for a while. So an unconscious bias is actually a habit that we have. It's a habit of doing, a habit of being, a habit of perceiving, a habit of responding. In neuroscience, we call it a neural pathway. We have an experience, there's emotion and energy connected to that experience, and then every time we have a similar experience, it connects up to that original experience in the neural pathways of our brain. And the more often we visit similar experiences, we build this long chain of experiences that say this is the way to do this, or this is the way this thing is, or this is what you can expect in this kind of situation, or this is how you should respond in a situation. We have trillions of neural pathways in our brains that help us to function on a daily basis. It's an automatic process that's done without conscious thought, hence the name unconscious bias. Now, what's important to understand about that is that these are things that we are dealing with on every day, all the time. We have lots of different names for this thing called unconscious bias. I have heard it called implicit bias. You may have heard it referred to as a stereotype. It's a generalizing process that the brain goes through that you can't stop. You can't keep it from happening. We're hardwired for it. I'll say more about that in a little while. Another term is favoritism, that we tend to favor certain kinds of things for a reason. Predisposition, that it's something we're predisposed to see things in a particular way. It's a prejudice, that we have this judgment, this prejudgment about something. Or it's a predilection. It's a tendency to operate in a particular way. Now, if you take those last three, that the pre at the beginning of each of those words means before. Before the incident that you're in the current moment, you have a history of information, a history of stuff that is there for you to help you operate in the world. So we have lots of unconscious biases, and one of them is the telephone. Now, I'd like y'all to go to your chat quick and tell me, when you hear a phone ring, do you feel like you have to answer it? Just a quick yes or no. Type it into the chat box. I'm seeing a lot of yeses, a couple of no's. Some people just need to look at it. Okay, so for some people, there's almost a compulsion to answer the phone. Interestingly enough, I remember in the early days of cell phones, this doesn't happen as much now because people create their own rings for cell phones, but there was a time, some of you might remember, when cell phones all had the same ring to them. And I remember being in a restaurant and hearing a phone ring and watching throughout the room as people would start patting their pockets, looking for their phones, checking to see if it was their phone that was ringing. They couldn't just eat their dinner. The phone was ringing. They had to make sure whether or not it was for them. I've had some folks tell me they absolutely have to answer a phone. They just can't stand it if the phone is ringing. They can't let it go to voicemail. They have to answer it. So we all have a response, and that is an unconscious bias. It's important to answer the telephone. It doesn't matter if I answer the telephone, and everything in between. And then we have the well, we went quickly there. We have the stoplight, the traffic light. Now, I'm going to guess, I don't think you need to type into the chat box, that most of you, when you see a traffic light, depending on what color it is, will stop, slow, or go. I, just this spring, met someone who hit the rear end of my vehicle who didn't think that red meant red and just kept right on going. So most of us have the common or a similar bias about traffic lights. Follow what the light says, follow the rules, stop on red, go on green, etc. The hot stove. So many kids, when they're very young, exploring the stove, might reach up and touch a stove without mom or dad being around to see what's happening in the moment. Most people, once they touch a hot stove, have a bias that says, don't do that, it hurts, don't ever do that again. So biases can range from a big danger alert, like the hot burner on the stove, to a safety alert in traveling throughout your day, to information alert. That's more often than not an emergency, and what you do with it is up to you in the moment. So we all have our own ways of responding to all of those biases. Those can be biases that serve us well. But we also have biases that can hinder us. As I was working on this presentation and this information, I came across the term Information Security Management System. And I thought it was interesting that it comes out to essentially be isms with the first letter of every word, because in a sense, that's what an ism is. An ism is information security management. It's helping you to stay safe in your world, managing your life in a way that helps you to stay safe. Now, isms, to a large degree today, have a negative connotation to them, just like unconscious bias does. But an ism is a grouping or a generalization based on our life experiences. Most of the isms that we talk about today, racism, and my mind just did a blank. There's hundreds of them. So we have all these different isms that we talk about, ageism, and we give them a negative connotation because what we're thinking is that bias, that generalization, keeps us from seeing in the present, so it's not good. Now that's understandable because the whole idea of the bias is about safety. The bottom line to this whole thing about how the brain works is that we're hardwired to fear difference. We are hardwired to fear the unknown. We are hardwired to fear what has caused pain or difficulty in the past for the purpose of physical and emotional safety in life. You can't change that hardwiring. You can't change it. You have neural pathways from your childhood that have been reinforced over years and years and years. You can manage what you do with that information, however, so that it can just simply be a bias as opposed to a negative bias. It's how we work with them that makes the difference. If they stay unconscious, if we're not aware that we have them, they can keep us from being in the here and now and interacting with people in a positive way. So there are racisms, isms like racism that can take us down if we're not paying attention. It can keep us from being with someone in the present moment, from experiencing a person for who they are, because we have this filter called this ism or bias that's getting in our way. So it's what we do with them that's going to make all the difference. Excuse me one moment. So we are hardwired, as I've been saying. It's the process of generalizing or fearing differences. It's hardwired for our survival. And so we don't want to get rid of our biases. You don't need to clean your brain from all of that information and somehow make it go away. Let it be there. Your brain will always respond to difference with fear. I'm going to say that again because it's really important. Your brain will always respond with difference to fear. You will respond to difference with fear. So you need to be aware that that's what's going on. It's not about getting rid of your past. It's about being aware of what you have as a bias and what you do with that. Now, you may or may not know that the brain processes over 400 billion bits of data per second. Now, those of you who are in IT or who deal with computers, that's a lot. It's faster than any computer that has ever been created so far. 400 billion bits of data per second. But we are only consciously aware of about 2,000 bits of data per second. So as you walk through your life, as you're doing your work, as you're talking to people, you are aware of only this tiny little bit of what your brain is processing about the world around you. Where you are you standing, are you sitting, where's the floor, where are the walls, who are you talking to, is it safe here? All of those kinds of things. Now, that ratio has also been expressed in some professional journals as 11 million bits of information and 40 bits per second. It's about the same ratio. What the ratio is that 99.9999995% of what we process happens unconsciously. So you take in so much information. The moment you see someone coming towards you, your brain, even if that person's a block away, your brain is already processing all kinds of incoming data. Where are they? Where are you? How far away are you? Does that general image look like it's going to be safe or not? All kinds of things like that you aren't even aware that you're thinking. If you were aware, you might be surprised at how many times in life you do things that you don't even recognize that you do, like take a slightly different step when you're walking because part of your brain recognized that the sidewalk was uneven or something of that nature. So it's all there, and you can't go back and rewire what's hardwired, but what you can do is work with how you deal with it. William James is a philosopher, educator, very wise person from the late 1800s. And he wrote, "We must make automatic and habitual, as early as possible, as many useful actions as we can. The more of the details of our daily life we can hand over to the effortless custody of automatism, the more our higher powers of mind will be set free for their own proper work." That's what the brain does. It makes automatic and habitual as early as possible, as many useful actions as it can, so that we can use the rational, logical RAM of our brain, the frontal cortex, to function in a daily basis. Because if we had to be looking at the ground, right foot, left foot, right foot, left foot, just to walk, we probably, most of us would not take our daily walks, and it would take us a heck of a long time to get wherever we're going. So we have these habits. It's good to have these habits. We can create a habit on top of a habit. We can create a habit of doing it a little bit differently, which I'll talk about toward the end of the session when we're talking about what you can do to change the way you respond to your unconscious bias. So now I'm going to take you all on a trip. To go on this trip, I request that you, in a minute, close your eyes. When we come back, I'm going to be asking you to type things into the chat box. So make sure that you have your chat box open and ready to go for when you come back from your trip. So I'm going to ask you right now, if you would please, to close your eyes and settle in and join me on a journey. It's possible that you've participated in an activity like this before. I've heard other speakers use similar activities in workshops like this. So if this starts to sound familiar to you, it might be similar to something you've heard before, and just go along with the journey for this time. You are going to go to a conference for your profession. Now, I know that right now we're in a time where people aren't traveling and being in large groups, but let's just pretend that that's not happening right now. And you're going to your favorite conference for your profession, and you're all excited about it. You're looking forward to seeing a lot of people that you know. You're looking forward to being in a new city, looking forward to learning lots of good stuff. You are excited. Pack your bags. Imagine yourself spending a few minutes putting your bags together, all the things you want to take with you on this trip. And then call the car service that's going to take you to the airport. The car arrives, and you go out your door and get into the car as your excitement builds. Once you arrive at the airport, you go to the ticket counter to check in. Give them your bags, make sure you have your boarding pass, and you're on your way to the gate. And because we usually have about a 2-hour window before, they're still telling us arrive 2 hours before flight time. So you're hanging out in the airport, just reading, watching something on your phone, whatever it might be, waiting for the plane. The plane arrives, doors open, gate opens, and you start boarding the plane. You meet the flight attendants as you get onto the plane, who welcome you and tell you that they're glad you're here for the flight. So you're all getting on the plane. Once you get to your seat and get settled, perhaps you're going to read or nap or maybe watch some screen during the trip, politely declining a beverage or a snack as the flight attendant walks down the aisle. You arrive at your destination, and everybody starts getting off the plane. The pilot has stepped into the doorway and is thanking people for flying with the airline as you all walk past him. And you are off to the conference. More excitement now as you once again get into a car that is taking you to your hotel. At the hotel, you are greeted by a concierge. You check in, and a bellhop takes your luggage to your room. Once you are settled, you meet the conference organizer in the lobby, and you go out to dinner. while you're at this restaurant, new to you because you haven't been to this city before, you notice a couple at the table near you talking about their new baby. And you listen in for just a little while, smiling as they talk about the joy of having this infant in their life. After dinner, on the way back to the hotel, your ride is stopped by a police officer for a broken taillight. Watch that play out. And finally settled, driver back in the driver's seat. You go back to the hotel. You return to your room and settle in for a good night's sleep. Now take a deep breath. Be thankful for your conference journey and open your eyes. I'm going to stop our screen share. I'm going to ask you some questions, and I would request that you type them into the chat box. So, first question is, what type of car picked you up for the airport? Oh my goodness, somebody's driving or riding in a limo. Woohoo! Okay, most of you are in sedan. What race was the driver? By the way, there's no right or wrong answers to any of this. It's just your experience. Maybe you didn't see it while you were in your visualization. That's very possible. So you got to the airport. What gender were the flight attendants? So we have male, female, mostly female so far. And when the pilot was thanking you for flying with the airline, what gender was the pilot? What race was the pilot? Okay. And you got to the hotel and you were greeted by a concierge. What race was the concierge? And about how old? All right. So we have males, females, looks like 30s to 50s. Okay. And how about the bellhop? What race, what age was the bellhop? Younger, okay. Looks like mostly males. Okay. And the conference organizer, how old was the conference organizer? Average age, 20s, 30s, 50s. Thank you. And when you were in the restaurant, what gender were the couple talking about their baby? Okay, so we have some mixed gender couples, we have some same gender couples. On the way back to the hotel, what race was the driver? Okay. So some of you just noticed gender, not necessarily race, and we have a wide range of races. And what gender and race was the police officer who stopped the car for the broken tail light? Looks like most of our officers were males. Different races. How did the circumstance play out? Was it peaceful interaction or a difficult interaction with the police officer? Peaceful but annoying. Yeah, the stop would be annoying. Okay. All right, so we ranged from peaceful to possibly difficult, being hypervigilant. And then what kind of hotel were you in? Were you in like a big fancy hotel? I did use the word concierge, so I might have influenced you a little bit there. What kind of hotel were you in? Big, nice, okay. Oh, someone was on the river, conference center. Okay, great. Now, everyone, please take a moment to think about your responses to the questions, because all the images that you saw reflect your personal bias. So whether we realize it or not, we have a bias or a predisposition or an expectation that bellhops are going to be younger people, maybe because we think it's an entry-level job. I mean, it doesn't have to be irrational. Biases can be very rational. It makes perfect sense to expect that the person carrying your luggage might be a younger person who has strength to carry, and then from there it could be male, female, any race, any background. So that's just an example of how we do that. Most people think that the pilot of the airplane was a white male. That's the most common response about the pilot of the airplane. The most common response about flight attendants in the majority is that they were female. Some people said here today, male and female. We're seeing more and more of that. But for many people, it's still, the response is generally female. So we have a predisposition. I said couple talking about their new baby. Yeah, someone just pointed out that the pilot was the only one that you said a gender pronoun. It is true that I slipped and said the gender pronoun on that one, and most of you did respond. But when I don't, and I usually don't, people still see the pilot as a white male most of the time. And the couple in the hotel, not in the hotel, in the restaurant, talking about their new baby, a vast majority of people imagine as they're thinking through where the answers to the questions, will imagine a couple, male and female, talking about a new baby. Some folks will see same-sex couples in their minds as they're imagining that. Everybody has their own version. And again, there's no judgment here about what you saw or why you saw it. I just wanted this to be an example for you of what you might be thinking, what predispositions you may have. I'm going to go back to screen share. Come on, screen share, give me the next slide, please. There we go. So in your handout, this full quote is there. A Yale University study found that male and female scientists, and specifically scientists is important here because they're both trained to be objective in their work, were more likely to hire men, to consider men more competent than women, and pay them more than they paid the women. Another research study showed that the science faculty rated male applicants for a position as more competent and hireable than female applicants. The faculty also selected a higher starting salary for the male applicants and offered more career mentoring to male applicants. When this was pointed out to them, faculty members were often shocked as they hadn't realized their own internal bias. So this is the thing about the unconscious bias that we need to be thinking about and paying attention to, is that it is in fact an unconscious process that may be affecting us in ways we don't expect. Now, as I've said, you can't not have that bias because there's history there. It's hardwired for you at this point. But what you can do is be more aware of what kinds of biases are there and choose what you want to do with it. So I'm going to briefly review a couple of common biases that people talk about. The affinity bias. People like people who are like them. We tend to believe people who are like us faster, quicker than people who are not like us, people who are different than us in some way, from a different culture, a different race, a different religion, a different gender, etc. After an interaction with another person, we will tend to feel more connected to the people who are like us. We may like people who are different than us. I'm not saying that doesn't ever happen, but we will tend to have a stronger affinity, liking for the people who are like us in whatever way is appropriate in that situation. Then there's this thing called the halo effect. And that is, if we observe something about someone that we think is really cool, that we really like about them, that halo tends to color our opinion about the rest of their attitudes, behaviors, comments, etc. The horns effect, the opposite, is if someone does something that we perceive as bad or wrong, something we really dislike or that's opposite to our belief systems, we tend to extend that judgment to other areas of that person's life. So if there's a really strong like or dislike about another person, that strong like or dislike can become a bias that filters how we see that person from that point on. The attribution bias, and I find this one to be pretty fascinating. We could do a whole class just on this. When we assess ourselves, when we look at our own behaviors, our own lives, and thinking, do we like what we did, and do we like how we're living, and all that sort of thing, we tend to consider our successes as a result of our efforts and our failures as being caused by others or external factors. This is a natural human process. When we assess others, we consider their successes as a result of luck or chance, and their failures as a result of their own behaviors. And we don't even realize that we're doing this. So being aware that that's how we tend to filter information can be very important, especially in the workplace interactions where we need to be a bit more objective, possibly, than in our day-to-day. Although, in many ways, I hope that objectivity carries through your entire life. We also have something called a confirmation bias. We tend to look for the information that confirms what we already believe. So I use this Toyota image, not because I'm getting paid to promote Toyota, but because my most recent vehicle is like the car in the middle there. It's that blue Toyota. And I went shopping for my car, and I already had a Toyota bias because I've owned Toyotas for 30 years. And I went to the dealership and I saw the blue car and decided that I thought I would really like to have that blue car. And then I saw all kinds of blue cars on the road, blue Toyota Corollas, all as I was driving. It's like all of a sudden there were all these blue Toyota Corollas all over the place. Not because there were more blue Toyota Corollas than there were before, but because I was looking for something to confirm the decision that I made that I want to believe was good. That's how the confirmation bias works. We look for the information that's going to reinforce what we already have decided or believe. And we tend not to see the information that goes against what we believe. Now I'm going to play this short video for you on inattentional blindness, which is an example of that. So those of you who are unable to see the screen, you will hear the audio from the video, but it's not going to be quite the same. Here we go.
The monkey business illusion. Count how many times the players wearing white pass the ball. The correct answer is 16 passes. Did you spot the gorilla? For people who haven't seen or heard about a video like this before, about half missed the gorilla. If you knew about the gorilla, you probably saw it. But did you notice the curtain changing color or the player on the black team leaving the game? Let's rewind and watch it again. Here comes the gorilla, and there goes a player, and the curtain is changing from red to gold. When you're looking for a gorilla, you often miss other unexpected events. And that's the monkey business illusion. Learn more about this illusion and the original gorilla experiment at theinvisiblegorilla.com.
And hopefully you'll all go there and take a look and explore this just a little bit more. It's called inattentional blindness. So when we focus in on something, like the white shirts to see how many passes are being made by the people in white, what happens is we tend to miss all kinds of other information. Not that that information isn't there, but we tend to miss a lot of it. So when we expect the traffic stop to be a tough traffic stop, as an example, what might happen is we might miss the clues that it's going to be an okay situation. We might exaggerate clues that it'll be a bad situation. We might not see a situation that went easily as being one that went easily. We might see it as one that was difficult. So whatever the situation happens to be, we will see what we choose to focus on, what our expectation is, or the choice that we make for our focus. And we will miss lots of other information. And that can get us into a lot of trouble because we'll miss cues that are telling us how to deal with a situation.
The monkey business.
So Daniel Simmons, by the way, is the original researcher for that. So what can we do? What can we do to better deal with the biases that we have? So the first thing is, and I'm going to do this from a children's perspective for a few minutes, because this bias is probably a deep one for just about every person that I have ever met, that I've ever known, possibly globally. We all learn as a small child that when we get to a place where there's intersecting traffic, a street, that we're supposed to stop, look, and listen. And so I'm going to frame my steps for you in that perspective so you can hook it up to that bias, because it's a bias that keeps you safe. And so if this new bias that you're going to work on developing, this new habit pattern, is hooked up to something that you know earlier helped you to stay safe, it'll make it easier for you to remember and work with. So stop is the first one. And the most important thing that you can do in any situation is to stop and take a breath. Not a deep breath that's an exasperated sigh. Not like that, but just simply a full breath, because that momentary shift to taking a breath before you speak and before you act is enough to do what we call a pattern interrupt and give you a chance to know what's happening in the moment, which takes us to the next step. So the first thing you want to do before you make a decision, before you make an assumption or action, before you say anything, stop and just take a moment to take a breath. It only takes a few seconds. Then look around you. Bring yourself into the present moment and remember the situation you're in. And this, again, only needs to take a few seconds. But it's like, okay, I am in the here and now with, in this case, we've been talking a little bit about job applicants. This job applicant in front of me, there's this person here. I have all these thoughts from the past about different people, but who is this person here? What do I need to know about this person here? What do I know specifically about this person beyond the initial what I see in terms of gender, race, age, etc.? What else do I know? So look more deeply, become more observant. Don't take it just on the surface. So look for the details. When you're at an intersection about to cross the street, you don't just look in your peripheral vision. Most people I've observed turn their heads and they look down the street one way. They turn and look down the street the other way. They turn and look back again the first way. And then they pay attention to the sound before they move. Is there a sound? Listen to your own brain and what it's telling you, not just for the external sounds, but what is your brain telling you? Is your bias saying this person comes from this culture, therefore they're not as educated? Is your bias saying this person has this gender, therefore that means X? Is your bias saying this person is this age, therefore they, whatever, don't know computers, can't do this, whatever it might be, or are better at computers and whatever? So listen to the internal conversation, because the internal conversation is going to bring up your biases. It's going to give you a chance to explore, what do I think? What do I think about this person in general? What do I think about this person from what they've actually said to me? How can I be present to this person in the here and now? Because that's what needs to happen to get past your biases, is to make them more conscious. That's the real critical piece, is make those biases much more conscious so that you can work with them. And then practice discernment. So discernment is the process of looking at lots of different ideas, getting lots of different information. The importance of the decision or the action you're about to take can determine how much time you're going to spend getting information and ideas. And then take your time to process them. Let them go through those gears in your head. Process them, compare them to past experience, compare them to your prejudices, your predisposition, your implicit bias, your unconscious bias, any favoritism that you might have. Just let all that information process through all of that before you make a decision or take an action. This is a really critical step, because it's the conscious processing of data that takes you out of that reactivity of your subconscious, the reactivity of do whatever it takes to stay safe and alive, and this is what you need to do based on past experience, and allows you to be in the here and now. So in our everyday lives, we don't encounter clear and present danger. Most of the time, most of us don't have that going on in our lives. But if you do, then you're not going to stop. When there is a clear present danger, you're going to become reactive. Your rational brain is going to get hijacked and your unconscious bias is going to take over. It will happen. And we are seeing in the world today more and more of that play out as people are in fear. And because they're in fear, those biases are playing out. They're being more reactive. Your job is to slow that process down. Stop, look, listen before you speak and before you act. Hopefully, this information has shone a light on what unconscious bias is all about and is asking you to show some light on your own unconscious biases. I recommend that you consider some introspection time, maybe right after this webinar if you can, sometime in the near future. Sit down with a notebook and write about your biases. What do you know? What do you believe? How have you seen yourself? How have you experienced yourself being reactive in the past? Think about past situations, especially situations where you did things that you regretted because it seemed to produce an upset or cause a dysfunction or push someone away. Be aware of that as best you can so that when you're in a situation where that becomes really important, you will be aware of those biases in advance. So that's our last slide.